Okay, hello, good afternoon. Yes, my name's Natasha Khan. I'm an instructional designer with King's Online, and I'm also a visiting senior research fellow with the Institute of Pharmaceutical Sciences. Over the next 20 minutes, myself and my colleague Cal will be overviewing learning analytics associated with two of King's longest running MOOCs, medicine adherence and understanding drugs and addiction. Okay, first a little bit of background. So King's FutureLearn MOOC portfolio. So in 2003, King's was one of the first universities to partner with FutureLearn to deliver MOOCs, or massive open online courses. In 2014, we had the first raft of 3 MOOCs, which included the 2 MOOCs I'll be talking about today, Understanding Drugs and Addiction and Medicine Adherence. And then since then, we've produced at least 5 more, ranging from Internet of Things to Shakespeare. So focusing on our 2 MOOCs of interest here, let's look at the similarities and differences. Well, just by almost coincidence, in the first raft of MOOCs, both of them were in a healthcare related category with a psychological underpinning. They were both looking at slightly overlapping topics relating to either the use of illegal or illegal drugs in terms of understanding drugs and addiction, and in medicine adherence, the underuse of prescribed medication. So that's a similarity. Obviously, they were both produced by King's, so they were designed to hit the same mission statements from King's, and obviously both running on the FutureLearn platform. However, differences. So both of these MOOCs actually differed in many respects. So Understanding Drugs and Addiction was designed and targeted a broad range of learners, ranging from healthcare professionals down to people who had a general interest in the subject or were service users. In terms of medicine adherence, it was designed very, very specifically for a small niche audience, which was healthcare professionals, especially those who prescribed or interacted daily with patients in medication-related consultations. In terms of faculty, 2 different faculties produced these MOOCs who, even though under the umbrella of King's, had different mission statements underpinning them. In terms of length and hours per week, they both differed as well, because Understanding Drugs and Addiction, as I said, was a more general overview for a wide range of audiences, and it ran for 6 weeks. Each time it's run for 6 weeks, with 4 hours commitment per week for learners. Whereas in medicine adherence was designed specifically for healthcare professionals, busy people, so it was designed to deliver very targeted information in bite-sized chunks. So it was condensed down to a 2-week course with 2 hours per week commitment. Okay, so moving more on to learning analytics. Here we have a very good quote stating that really what is our purpose? It's to understand and optimize learning and the environments in which it occurs. At the bottom we can see that actually FutureLearn, for all MOOCs, are actually quite generous with the information they give us, the data we can play with. So we have overall course measures, for example, the enrollment and completion rates. We also have pre and post course survey feedback. You know, the disadvantage to that is that it's only completed by people who voluntarily complete these surveys, but it does give a good snapshot of, for example, demographics and satisfaction levels. And we also provided with raw data from each step, that is, each activity within the course. Now, you may have noticed in the title of this talk the word cynicism. So I'd just like to take a bit of a step back and consider this. I mean, I'm sure you may have heard in the press, in literature, that there is cynicism about MOOCs. You know, why are we developing them? What is their purpose? These two quotes here perhaps highlight some of the issues relating to these kinds of schools of thought, which generally relate back to early MOOCs in the 2007 onwards. When MOOCs were first run, they were run on the principle of connectivism. In other words, people, learners, congregating together to study a mutually interesting topic, and during that mutual study, shaping their own learning, not just through interacting with the materials, but also with each other. And actually, the earlier MOOCs probably didn't hit that target very well. And there was a lot in the press and literature about MOOCs just being marketing vehicles, more concerned about institutional prestige rather than the actual learning experience of the people who engaged with it. However, since then, and especially of course in the case of King's MOOCs, there's been a really strong move towards our MOOCs having a strong learning theory framework and incorporating formalised learning design, instructional design, and concrete moderation of discussions, etc., within the courses. So really, that even though this kind of view still bubbles around, there isn't a firm basis for it. It's not really shouldn't be a fear-based threat. So during the next few minutes, Cal and I will explore why potentially this is still hanging around. Oh, sorry. Okay, so let's look at some very broad brush data from our two MOOCs. So medicine adherence and drugs addiction have both run 3 to 4 times since 2014. You can see here the numbers of people who actually enrolled in these courses. So over 18,000 for medicine adherence and 34,000 for drugs and addiction. In the top row of this table, we have learners. This actually means the proportion of people who actually visited the course after they enrolled. So we can see, you know, a general trend there. About half of people who actually enrolled actually did go onto the course. The numbers underneath are then display a percentage of the top level learners. So you can see across medicine adherence and drugs addiction, we do have 86% of people being active. That means that they actually, once they were on the course, they actually completed at least one step. Then we have levels of returning learners. As mentioned, these courses had a number of different weeks. So this is a measure of people who completed 1 week and then returned for the next week. Social learners, quite an important data indication here of the amount of people who actually wanted to not just watch videos, not just read the text, but actually take part in discussions online. And here we have, you know, about 25-30% of learners who actually went onto the course, took that mode. And then at the bottom, fully participating learners. And you can see some disparity between the two, but this potentially could be because medicine adherence, number one, was so targeted to a niche audience that people who actually enrolled did intend to complete the course for CPD reasons, but also it could be because it was a 2-week course compared to a 6-week course. Looking at course feedback surveys, we can see that for both medicine adherence and drugs and addiction, we had international audiences. So for both courses, not combined but individually, they had learners from at least 100 different countries. We can see that our target audiences were met. So in terms of medicine adherence, 75% of people who engaged with the course and completed the surveys indicated they were healthcare professionals, with the other 25% of people generally being service users. For drugs and addiction, about 40% of people were healthcare related, and the rest were general interests, academics and service users. We had high satisfaction levels across both of the MOOCs in terms of pitch, activities and meeting expectations at 90-95% upwards. And also, importantly, we through the surveys, we saw that the course actually added something to the learners' lives or experiences, and we saw an increased desire for further study or increased confidence in the workplace and learning new skills. However, let's pause for a second here and think, what is this information telling us? It's given us a nice snapshot of 2 courses. But going back to the definition of learning analytics, how is this going to help us to improve on future courses and future runs of these MOOCs? And I'll pass over to my colleague, Cal.
Right, I have to apologise to you. I can make sense, I can make eye contact, and I can run to time. I cannot do all 3. There's going to be a bit of reading here. Right. Nice pictures. The Future Learn platform design, as we said, is based on the pedagogic principles of social constructivism as articulated by Diana Laurillard, and that views learning as being a process where 4 stages can be delineated. They are discursive, interactive, adaptive and reflexive, and obviously you do that with other people, as the term social implies. The chart on the left shows the pattern of learners following each other and educators at the beginning of the first run of understanding drugs and addiction, and the picture on the right shows very nicely, I think, the blossoming of communities of interest as people followed each other, formed their own little groups, and I love this. I have a couple of issues with it. I think it presents a great deal of data in a very readily understandable, accessible way, and we're wanting to improve our MOOC offerings. And in order to improve them, we need research. And in order to do research, you need funding. And in order to get funding, you need to publish. Now, academic publishers look very uneasily at things that are not randomized control trials or qualitative surveys. So when I want to use an illustration like that, that's okay. That's actually a vector graphic. I can use that. I know the algorithm it came from, I know how it's been adapted, I know how it was produced, and I need to be able to explain those things to my audience, which is a generalist, not a technical audience, in a couple of sentences in my paper. So that's just something to keep in mind, because I think we sometimes miss each other. You give me something beautiful and I go, it's lovely. I don't know how I can use it though. That's just one of the issues that we come across. Okay, I mentioned Diana Laurillard. This is something else she said. She said quite a lot, actually. Learning analytic techniques have been developed from techniques used in business and commerce to deal with big data, and quite rightly so. Now, the original techniques are great if you want to measure whether click streams result in sales. But learners aren't passively consuming web content. Information is no more knowledge than loose ingredients make a cake. And while a platform provider might function in a manner somewhat akin to a supermarket with a smorgasbord of courses laid out for potential learners, we don't think of our MOOCs as being anything akin to a tin of beans. So as an educator, I'm interested in whether the learners' choices about how they participate affect retention in the MOOC, and I'm interested in their cognitive engagement. Here's another bit of cynicism. This time it's one founded on the figures of which the platform providers are rightly so proud. They do a great job of marketing for us. They get massive enrollments, and these massive enrollments become the baseline from which attrition is measured. So we've kind of shot ourselves in the foot here, because MOOCs have unique characteristics as educational resources, and you might actually expect somebody to dip into a MOOC rather than drop out of it. We don't know what learners' motivations might be for enrolling on the course. They might want to update existing knowledge. They might be interested in one facet of the things that we want to teach. And so the term enrolment is a bit misleading, because it's not very much like enrolling at King's College London. When I enrolled here, they wanted my passport, my birth certificate, my O-level certificate, £1,000, and goodness knows what else. It's a bit different from a single click on something I've caught sight of and gone, oh, that might be interesting. So I think if colleges wanted to measure their attrition rate from, for example, a baseline of everyone who ever requested a prospectus, we could come up with some pretty troubling numbers. So we're looking for some new ways of assessing the impact of a MOOC, one that takes into account learner autonomy, one that's a bit more respectful of the unique nature of a MOOC. One of the places I started was I looked at which of the platform affordances which were voluntary people actually used in the course. And what I found was you could mark a step as complete, and that triggered a colour change, which was kind of rewarding in terms of the platform. You could undertake a multiple choice machine marked quiz, which would give you a bit of feedback on, did you get that? Yep, you did, brilliant. You could join in by making a discussion on the comment board. So the people in group 1 did none of those things. I'm going to call them tasters, just for the sake of it. In the second group, that was a big group. I mean, you can see 3 big groups here, and I'm going to focus on them. Group 2, I'm going to call them strong starters, because what they did was they came to week 1, they marked some steps as complete, they seemed to be approaching it in an orderly manner, and I rather take it that they wanted to continue with the course. But actually most of them didn't get to the end of week 1. And none of them took a quiz, because the first place you could take a quiz was the end of week 1. So I'm very interested in that group, because we lost them, and I don't think they wanted to be lost. We've got people in what's listed as mode 3, and they're the quiet ones. I'll come back to them in a minute. So they did the steps, they did the quizzes, they wanted the feedback on how they were doing with their learning, but they didn't make any comments. In group 5, we've got what FutureLearn calls fully participating. So they used all the affordances of the platform, they marked things complete as they went on, they did all the quizzes, they made comments on the discussion boards, and as you might expect from the learning theory, they did actually do best in terms of retention. They stayed for longer, they had a lower rate of attrition. Surprising though, I said go back to the quiet ones. The quiet ones did rather well. Lots of them did finish the course, and while they did have a slightly higher rate of attrition than the fully participating learners, they did a lot better than I had anticipated when I ran the numbers. So I thought that was quite interesting, because what I haven't said here is I don't know whether the people who made comments stayed in the course longer because they used the discussion board. We've got correlation, we don't have causation. And just because I've got a huge mass of data, it doesn't mean to say it necessarily contains all the answers to the questions of interest. So it's a strength having all this data. It's great to be able to amble round into what they actually did at the time that they did it, how long they spent there, things like that. If we want to make the improvements to the design of the platform, to the layout of the course, to what we have, we are going to need to actually really consider closely our questions. We've got another question. Lots of educators don't think people learn in MOOCs. Are they best viewed and understood as a form of social media, as entertainment, like a television documentary perhaps? Or are they genuinely a serious educational resource from which people are learning? And who should pay for them? Why? What are the returns? Okay, taking the first part first, evidence of learning. I don't tend to watch Panorama and then answer a load of short answer questions on it. And we found in our MOOC that we had 9 of our 70 odd steps which contained short educator set questions, and they got by far the greatest number of comments. They were almost half the comments made were on those nine steps, and I think that is, I would regard that as evidence that people were cognitively engaged, that they were putting effort into it, and that they were genuinely there to learn. This chart doesn't really tell us all that much, except that people attempted quizzes, and more of them got more questions right as you go on through the course. I put it in mainly because I wanted to honour the learning of those 1,681 people who never said anything, but they did do the quizzes. Finally, the big question, the $38,000 question, apparently. There's obviously a huge range of ways you can make a MOOC, which give a huge range of costs. But King started out with a view to becoming a player in this new game and a sense of excitement about the possibilities, but the costs of producing a new MOOC are quite high, and even the costs of updating an existing MOOC are not inconsiderable, and we do need to keep them fresh and relevant. Those in charge of the purse strings are quite reasonably asking the question of what they're getting for their money, what the return on the investment is. Okay, we sell statements of participation for our MOOCs. Across the 3 runs of both our courses, we've sold about 1,300 of these at 20 quid a pop. It's not going to fund that. So, you know, this is a real question, because if we don't get some decent quality research which explains and exposes what the institution are getting for their money beyond a very expensive digital showcase, there is a risk that fewer MOOCs will be produced, and instead of MOOCs upsetting HEIs will find that MOOCs are just a small chapter in the development of traditional online education. So just to recap, we have talked about these groups of stakeholders, and we have talked about some of these issues, concerns, where the focus needs to be. And, you know, unless we are all in discussion like we are today in this seminar and working together to collaborate on addressing these questions, I would hate to see the MOOC phenomena go. Personally, I'm a lifelong learner, and I'm passionately committed to free, accessible, high quality education being available. So I hope that's given you some food for thought. I've got some references on the last page, but I shall leave you there. Thank you.
Thank you very much.